Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today is day 22, and today we're essentially just learning some new verb types. So remember, we saw a lot of the most important ones already, and today we're adding a few more that are somewhat more peculiar, but they all have one thing in common. They are non-suffixed. So that sounds a bit technical, but if we think about it for a moment, the meaning is pretty self-explanatory, right? A non-suffixed verb type doesn't have a suffix, right? So if we think back to a lot of the really important types we learn, like I verbs or yay verbs or ova verbs or nu verbs, right? All of those tags we were using were actually the suffix that was added to a root to create a new verb of that given type, right? So that's, for example, what makes an ova verb an ova verb, right? It had the ova, that suffix attached to it, and that's why all those verbs behave exactly the same way, right? Same thing goes again for I verbs, or think about other suffixes that are simply vowels, right? We could call that a stem vowel, but also think of it as a kind of suffix, right? For example, a verbs, e verbs, yeah verbs, right? That a, e, yeah, those all can be thought of as suffixes, right? So what makes non-suffix verbs tricky, if we think back to the simplest example we've seen already, like žít, right? We had that already, žít, and we called that a verb. So let's think one more time carefully about what makes that verb tick, and we'll see as we go through some new variations today, some new non-suffix verb types, that they're all acting in more or less the same way. Namely, that there's some bit of information typically that's missing from the infinitive. We look at the infinitive, for example, žít, right? What's the stem, right? If we simply get rid of the infinitive ending, the soft T, we're left with G, right? But the forms of that verb are not žiu, žioš, and so forth, right? They're živu, živioš, živiot, right? So that's why we're going to tag that non-suffix verb as a verb, meaning simply that the ending of the stem is ve, and that's what's again typically not visible in the infinitive. So it's something we have to know in addition to the infinitive. Um, so again, let's review, right? Since these verbs are non-suffixed, there's no suffix that's coming in between the root and the verb endings we're adding, right? So for example, if we think back to an I verb like читать, right? The root would be чит, right? Having to do with reading, right? And to that we add the suffix I, and then to that we add an infinitive ending or personal endings, and we get читаю, читаешь, читает, and so forth, right? So for what makes a non-suffix verb uh, work is we're adding endings directly to the stem, right? So we're taking živ, we're not adding any sort of special suffix to that root. We're just adding verb endings directly to the stem. Now, what happened in the the infinitive typically is, for phonetic reasons, I mean, this happened historically, some bit of information, in this case, the ve, was lost, right? It ceased to be pronounced in front of that infinitive ending. And so again, we were left with žít, which isn't very helpful in terms of the conjugation. But once we have the ve, we have our root živ, and to that we simply add the yul endings, right? So all of these non-suffix types are adding yul endings directly to the root or the stem. In this case, живу, живешь, живет, живем, живете, живут. Let's see, let's look at a few new verbs just to compare, right? Žít, there's the one we've already had, žít. We call that a verb. Okay, so that non-suffix type, we're tagging just based on its final stem consonant. Now, the second example here is a little bit trickier, начать. Note the /n. Okay, this is getting a bit technical, and this verb type is somewhat unusual. Whenever you see a /, we're thinking non-syllabic root, right? Most Slavic roots, like for example, živ, right? They consist of a consonant, then a vowel, then another consonant, typically. Or at least that's the most common form of a Slavic root, right? But some roots, like the one for beginning in this case, is simply che-n, right? There's no vowel inherent to the root, right? And so we call those non-syllabic roots because, again, to have a syllable, we need a vowel. right? So look at this verb tag /n. That means that any non-suffixed verb like this that consists of whatever consonant plus an n in its root is going to behave like this, right? So you see essentially what happens, right? Once we start conjugating these forms, we start with the notch, right, which is visible in the infinitive, nachat. But then again, we have to add something else that's missing from the infinitive. In this case, an n, right? That final consonant in the non-syllabic root. By the way, the na is a prefix. That's not part of the root itself. And so at any rate, we get nachnu, nachnyosh, nachnyot, nachnyom, nachnyotie, nachnut. Okay, it's always worth keeping in mind that is there another way to learn this? Yeah, you could just memorize it, just almost as if it were an irregular verb. And again, a lot of beginners' textbooks would probably, in one form or fashion, tell you that this is just irregular, right? And just kind of force you to learn it by rote, which, by the way, you sort of have to do anyway, right? As we've mentioned a million times, there's no avoiding just kind of drilling these forms and just kind of learning them one way or another. But again, in the long run, I think it's actually really helpful to do a bit of legwork and think really about how these verb types are formed, right? Again, that'll pay off in the long run, because as we start seeing more examples of a given type, you'll start noticing the pattern and you'll see exactly what's going on there, and it'll make it easier to drill these verbs and to start using them in speech. Okay, so one more example. Look at jdat, a third example. And this is one of our trickiest verb types in terms of the tag. We're going to call these verbs NSA verbs. Okay, which is that's obviously rather technical and a bit contrived, but it's maybe the best option available to us. What does the NSA mean? It means that the roots of these verbs are going to consist of a non-syllabic root, note the /, right? And the NS there just simply stands for non-syllabic, but those letters are also kind of standing in visually for any two consonants, right? So the root of the vowel is going to consist of two consonants, right? No vowel, hence non-syllabic. And then you've got the stem vowel added onto it. That's what gave us our infinitive, for example, jdat, right? It's had this vowel tacked onto it, but the root and indeed the stem we're going to use for conjugating the verb is simply je, there, right? No vowel, and hence again, no syllable. The root is non-syllabic. Okay, so the conjugated forms of that will be jdu, jdjosh, jdjot, jdjom, jdjom, jdjotye, jdut. Okay, so now that those three examples we just saw are kind of three rather typical examples, right? The first one with the final stem vowel that's missing. The second with the / introduced is a non-syllabic root. And then we have this very tricky type NSA, where the NS can stand in for any two consonants. Okay, so let's maybe leave that aside for a moment and just look now specifically at some new types today. The first type we're going to call oi verbs, oi. Okay, this is a little bit different from, for example, zhit, where the only thing missing from our not visible in the infinitive was a single consonant, ve. In this case, we have a vowel plus a consonant that is part of the vowel root that's not visible in the infinitive, oi. Right, so let's take our head vowel here for this type, muit. It means to wash. Okay, but what is the stem we're going to use for conjugating? It's actually moi. Okay, so again, you see what all of these non-suffix verbs have in common. They're something has dropped out of the infinitive that we really need to know to conjugate the verb. Okay, so in this case, we've got to keep the M, add the oi back in there. That gives us our stem moi. And then when we start adding the endings, u, yosh, yot, etc., we get our conjugated forms. Now remember that if the endings aren't stressed, we're not going to see a yaw everywhere. We're going to see yeah instead. And that's what happens with these types. Well, most of them actually. Let's look at the examples. Muit is stem stressed. So our forms are moyu, moyish, moyet, moyim, moyetie, moyut. Now look at the past tense here, just kind of for reference, right? Мыл, мыла, мыла, мыли, right? So again, as usual in the past tense, we don't expect anything unusual to happen, right? We're back to going straight from the infinitive, taking off the soft T, adding L, and then we get our past tense forms. Okay, look at pieć. Again, that infinitive doesn't really tell us a whole lot. This is an oi verb, so we need to use a stem ending in oi, namely poi, and then adding our endings. This one happens to be in-stressed. Again, there's no way to know that. It's not predictable. So another thing we have to learn in addition to the infinitive. We get пою, поешь, поет, поем, поете, поют, right? In stress. Again, past tense is nothing unusual. Пел, пела, пела, пели. Okay, закрыть, to close. Another oi verb, stem stress. So we get закрою, закроешь, закроет, закроем, закроете, закроют. And past tense, again, nothing unusual there. Закрыл, закрыла, закрыла, закрыли. Okay, another verb, you can tell that it's related just with a different prefix, от, крыть, открыть, meaning to open. Открою, откроешь, откроет, откроем, откроете, откроют. By the way, you may have noticed that those two last verbs, закрыть, открыть, they obviously have the same root, right? Just different prefixes, and so we get different meanings, right? Закрыть meaning to close, and открыть, от means away from. So открыть means to, I guess, sort of swing open, literally to open. Okay, so let's look now at the pairs, right? We've learned a new conjugation type. Now we need to, in order to use these verbs, we need to know the aspectual pairs, right? So here they are. Мыть, помыть, петь, спеть, закрывать, закрыть, открывать, открыть. Okay, so how are these pairs formed? Well, the first two, we've simply added a prefix, right? По and с. And then the second two examples, we've derived an imperfective, right? So we'll talk more about that later. But for now, notice the pattern, right? All derived imperfectives are I verbs. It makes them very easy to conjugate. In this case, we've created that by adding not simply I, but vi, right? We've used ivi, actually, ivi, to get a new derived imperfective, zakryvать. Okay, how would that conjugate? Закрываю, закрываешь, закрывает, right? It's just an ordinary I verb, just like читать. And also открывать, same thing. Открываю, открываешь, открывает. Okay, let's just fill in a few blanks here, practicing the new conjugated forms, right? Just make sure your form agrees with the subject. And also keep in mind that if we're conjugating a perfective form, then that's going to be future tense, right? So we've got to choose, look at the English example here and make sure we're thinking about tense in addition to just simply conjugating the verb. Okay, so she'll wash the car. Sounds like a one-time washing, right? She'll wash it, also future tense, of course. So we'd express that using a perfective verb. And in this case, that would be помыть, right? That's an oi verb, so we'll get она помоет машину. She'll wash the car. Number two, he washed the dishes. That's past tense. Sounds like a one-time completed action. Он помыл посуду, right? Past tense. Он помыл посуду. Number three, won't you wash them? Okay, let's assume this is ты, right? Will you not wash the dishes? Okay, again, that'll be perfective future tense. Не помоешь посуду? Right, a question. Не помоешь посуду? Number four, I've already washed them. Now, by the way, in Russian, we're not really saying them. We're talking about dishes as a singular only noun. This happens sometimes. We'll talk about it more later. Some certain nouns in Russian may be singular only or plural only in ways that may strike us as odd because it doesn't line up with English usage, right? So this feminine noun посуда refers collectively to dishes, right? And it's always singular. So in number four, we're literally saying something more like, I've already washed her, again, just to capture the feminine, the grammatical gender of посуда. Я ее уже помыл, right? Помыл. I've already washed them completely. By the way, if the speaker were feminine, it would be я ее уже помыла. Okay, number 5, she sings very well. Okay, that's present tense, so we need imperfective. Она очень хорошо поет. Она очень хорошо поет. Number 6, we'll sing him a song. Okay, that's again going to be future perfective, so we need to use спеть, right? Мы споем ему песню. Споем. Number 7, he sang the child a song. Okay, now past tense, perfective. Он спел ребенку песню. He sang the song completely, right? One time, perfective aspect. Number 8, she loves to sing. Она любит. Okay, what do we need here? Remember, loves to sing. Look at the English. We're getting an infinitive, and we need the same thing in Russian. Remember how we discussed that quite typically in Russian, we're using infinitives in the same situations we would use them in English, right? She loves to sing. Она любит петь, петь. Okay, number 9, they were washing dishes. Okay, sounds like an ongoing activity in the past. So we need imperfective. We need to use мыть. Plural past tense would be мыли. Они мыли посуду. Number 10, I won't sing at all. Okay, this is not simply saying that I won't sing this song or I won't sing once. We're making this blanket statement. I will not be singing at all. I won't sing at all whatsoever. Okay, so that explains the imperfective future tense, right? The compound future tense with imperfectives. Не буду петь. Я не буду петь вообще. I won't be singing at all. Okay, let's do a few more. Who opened the window? I'm cold. Okay, sounds like a perfective situation. The window is open. Кто открыл окно? Мне холодно. Okay, why masculine? Открыл. Why are we using the masculine past tense? Because remember, for grammatical purposes, кто is always masculine singular in Russian, right? Always masculine singular. So we could never, ever say in Russian, кто открыла or кто открыли. That would always be incorrect. Okay, number 2, they're always opening the window. Okay, now let's see, we need present tense, right? They are always opening. It's present tense. It's also repeated action. Они всегда открывают окно. Number 3, I'll close it. I'll always close it. Okay, so first sentence seems like a one-time thing. I'll close the window, perfective. But the second one, I'll always close it. We have repetition, so that's going to have to be imperfective. So the first one will be я его закрою. Я его закрою, just simply conjugating the perfective verb. But the second one, right, we need the compound future. Я всегда буду его закрывать. Закрывать. Я буду закрывать. Number 4, they opened a new restaurant. Okay, sounds like just a completed one-time thing. Они открыли новый ресторан. They opened the new restaurant. By the way, note the simple past verb there. They opened the restaurant. In English, that pretty strongly implies that it's completed, right? Now, how would we translate they were opening a new restaurant, right? They were in the process of doing it. That would be imperfective, and that would be in Russian, они открывали, right? So again, in the past tense, it can be useful to contrast English simple past with a continuous past tense, right? Opened versus were opening. Those are two very different things in Russian in terms of aspect. She forgot to close the fridge. Okay, again, look at the infinitive in English. She forgot to close. Она забыла закрыть холодильник. Now we mentioned this, right? If you forgot to do something, the point usually is you forgot to go and actually completely do it, right? So verbs like забыть here, especially, it seems like a very one-time, very specific situation. Those will usually call for perfective, right? Она забыла закрыть холодильник. Number 6, her husband closed it. Okay, sounds like a one-time event, right? Ее муж закрыл его. He closed it. Right? Remember that его form here is the accusative of on, right? Referring back to холодильник. Number 7, he would open the window every day. Okay, look at this tense form in English. He would open the window every day, right? That's the one way to capture repetition or habit in English in the past tense, right? So again, note also the каждый день, that's a red flag. We definitely need imperfective and it needs to be past tense. Он открывал окно каждый день. Number 8, she was opening her umbrella. Okay, again, this is look at the past continuous tense. She was opening, not she simply went and opened it, right? She was in the process of opening it, right? To capture that in Russian, we're going to have an imperfective verb. We need past tense. So this will be Она открывала зонт. Okay, here are a few questions you can try answering with these verbs. Кто у вас дома обычно моет посуду? Right, who around your house usually washes the dishes? Или, может быть, у вас есть посудомоечная машина, or maybe you have a dishwasher. By the way, if you look at that crazy adjective, посудомоечная машина, well, machina means, usually for us, it means car, but it obviously is related to a machine or some type of contraption, right? And a dishwasher, you can see посудомоечная combines pasuda and mыть, right? The noun and the verb we've just been using here, right? Literally a dishwashing machine. Okay, number 2. Ты любишь петь? Do you like to sing? Do you love to sing? Ты хорошо поешь? Do you sing well? Не споешь нам сейчас песню? Will you not sing us a song right now? Okay, again, a one-time request, right? Will you not sing us a song? Completely perfective. Споешь. Okay, our next non-suffix verb type is, we're going to call this a soft sign verb. And we have a couple of pretty useful examples. Pít means to drink, and also beat means to strike or beat or hit or anything like that. Beat. Pít, beat. Okay, how do these verbs work? Well, again, why are we calling them soft sign verbs? Because that's the final bit of the stem we need that's not visible in the infinitive, right? So again, we're calling these soft sign verbs, just a way to remember, well, we need to throw in a soft sign and then add the your endings onto that stem. So if we look over a few examples, pít means to drink imperfective. And look what happens. We keep the pe, of course, insert a soft sign, that's the missing part of the stem, then add our your endings. Пью, пьешь, пьет, пьем, пьете, пьют. Past tense here, we're going again straight from the infinitive. Пил, пила, пила, пили. Okay, the only unusual thing about that, if you remember, some verbs happen to stress the ah ending in the past tense. That's just a slight, obviously stress-related irregularity. It's not predictable. Peach happens to be one of those verbs. So that's one little, again, we say over and over that the past tense is usually very predictable. We're working straight from the infinitive, but sometimes the stress pattern is one example of something to watch out for that does crop up every once in a while. Okay, what about the perfective? Выпить. We'll review this later, but the prefix вы in perfective verbs is always going to be stressed, right? So take note of that right now. We'll return to that idea down the road, especially in book 3, when we start talking more about prefixes. Anyway, so the form here is выпью, выпьешь, выпьет, выпьем, выпьете, выпьют. And then in the past tense, выпил, выпила, выпила, выпили. Again, the вы, note how it's stressed throughout all of these forms, every single form of this perfective verb. Okay, so that means to drink completely. We could think of it as, draining your glass or, drinking something up completely as opposed to being in the process of drinking, right? That would be pít. Okay, beat means, again, to beat or strike. We supply the soft sign, add the yo endings, and we get бью, бьешь, бьет, бьем, бьете, бьют. Past tense, бил, била, била, били. Totally regular. Okay, let's get a perfective form, meaning to completely break something, right? So to break, to shatter. This means literally, ras, the prefix means in all directions, like apart, like this, right? Divergence. And so the idea here is we're hitting something such that it kind of flies to pieces. So we could think of this maybe as shattering. Now here we're supplying a mobile vowel in between the prefix and the beach. So that's another slightly unusual feature of this verb. Разобью, разобьешь, разобьет, разобьем, разобьете, разобьют. So that's somewhat unusual. Now in the past tense, we don't have that mobile vowel. So we simply have разбил, разбила, разбила, разбили. Okay, look at a few examples. Он выпил бутылку вина. He drank an entire bottle of wine successfully, completely, right? That's the perfective. Он выпил бутылку вина. He drank it up. Не хочешь выпить? Would you like to have a drink? That's kind of a more colloquial usage, right? It doesn't necessarily imply, would you like to go drink completely, right? That doesn't really make much sense. It just simply means to go have a drink, perfective. Okay, он выпил водку и съел огурец. He downed the vodka and ate a pickle, right? Pickle there is what's called a zakuska in Russian, a snack that you have with vodka. Okay, so our new pairs involving these verbs we just learned are пить, выпить, and разбивать, разбить. Again, look at the pair for breaking. Разбивать, you see, is a derived imperfective. Again, it's an I verb. You see that it's rather long because we've added the suffix "vi" to it to create an imperfective to go with разбить, right? Meaning, so this new verb means to shatter. That's the pair for it. Разбивать, разбить. Okay, let's try to fill in a couple of blanks here. Again, watch tense. Think about aspectual choice. He doesn't drink wine. Okay, that's a present tense verb. Он не пьет вино. Он не пьет вино. Number two, I like to drink juice. Or we could say literally, I love to drink juice. Okay, again, we need an infinitive, just like in English. I love to drink. Люблю пить сок. Number three, we were drinking vodka. Okay, past progressive, right, in English, past continuous tense. It's an ongoing action, so we'd say мы пили водку. We were drinking it. We were in the process of drinking it. Number four, we drank the vodka. Okay, simple past tense sounds like we drank it all up. It's a completed action. So we'd say мы выпили водку. Мы выпили водку. Number five, I'll drink the tea. Okay, sounds like I'll drink it up. It seems to imply just the completed action. So that'll be a perfective future. Я выпью чай. Я выпью чай. Now, what if we said I'll drink tea? Well, even just by leaving out the the definite article in English, it sounds like I'll sit around drinking tea, not I'll drink the tea, which sounds like it's implying completion, but rather, oh, I'll drink tea. So I'll sit around having some tea. Я буду пить чай. Okay, number six, what was she drinking? Okay, again, note the tense in English. It gives us a good clue that we need imperfective, past, right? She was drinking. Что она пила? Что она пила? And note there the unusual stress, right? The I ending is stressed there in the past tense. Who drank up the milk? Okay, sounds like a completed action, right? The milk is gone, someone drank it up completely. Кто выпил молоко? Кто выпил? Right, we need perfective, and remember, кто, as we mentioned, is always masculine, singular for grammatical purposes. Number eight, he drank a bottle of beer. Okay, simple past tense, sounds like it's completely drunk, right? Maybe he is too, I don't know, but right, we need a perfective verb here. Он выпил бутылку пива. He drank, perfective, a bottle of beer. They rarely drink alcohol. Okay, that's present tense, right? So no brainer, we need imperfective. Они редко пьют алкоголь. By the way, if that were past tense, they rarely drank alcohol, right? That rarely, again, is telling us this is their habit. This is an ongoing behavior, so it's going to call for imperfective. Okay, number 10, they were drinking coffee. Okay, again, past continuous. Они пили кофе. Not they drank the coffee, not they drank it up, but they were in the process of drinking it, imperfective. Okay, a few more. Did he break the plate? Okay, now let's fill in some blanks using the beating and breaking verbs. Did he break the plate? He's always breaking dishes. Okay, first one sounds like a one-time completed action, past tense. Он разбил тарелку. Okay, second one, he's always breaking dishes. That's present tense, also talking about habit, right? Он всегда разбивает посуду. Он всегда разбивает посуду. Okay, number two, careful or you'll break my vase. Okay, sounds like we're talking about a very specific context, right? A one-time potential breakage, right? Осторожно, а то, which just means like or in the sense of otherwise, right? Be careful or otherwise you will break my new vase. А то разобьешь мою новую вазу. Again, note that rather unusual mobile vowel that's being brought in here to break up the z, b consonant cluster, right? So that's a rather peculiar feature of this verb. You don't see that every day, so I wouldn't be too worried about that at this point, at least. Осторожно, то разобьешь мою новую вазу. Number three, oh my God, the child is beating the cat. Боже мой, боже мой. By the way, боже is a vocative case form of Bog, right, which we saw earlier, meaning God. The vocative case was used to call out people's names in Slavic. And many Slavic languages like Czech or Polish, they still have vocative forms. Luckily, Russian doesn't, right? Only in a very limited number of nouns, like, for example, Bozhe, right? When you're crying out, oh God, right? Literally as if you're calling out his name, right? You get this, what now is basically an archaic vocative case form. But again, good news, we don't have to learn the vocative case in this book because it's no longer a regular feature of the grammar in modern Russian. Okay, the child is beating the cat. Okay, present tense, beating, we need to use beat. Боже мой, ребенок бьет кошку. The child is beating the cat, accusative. Okay, here are a few Russian sayings involving the dative. We're going to learn the dative. Well, actually, we've already learned the dative, sorry. So this is just kind of some extracurricular material here, some cultural stuff involving the dative case. Что русскому хорошо, то немцу смерть. There's a good one. What for the Russian is good, that for the German is death. Okay, so a rather extreme way of saying sort of different strokes for different folks, I guess, right? What's good for the Russian is death for the German. By the way, Niemiec here can be thought of somewhat as a kind of catch-all word for foreigners generally. It doesn't necessarily mean a German person. I don't think we've mentioned yet that the word in Russian and generally in Slavic for a German is Niemiec, and that's from the adjective nemoy, which means mute, right? So the Germans are those basically who can't speak properly, meaning they don't speak Slavic. So anyway, we could say more about that, but for now, let's just move on. Как коровье седло, like a saddle for a cow. A cow is korova, right? So as for a cow, a saddle. So unless you're used to saddling up cows, right, that sounds like a rather peculiar and useless thing, right? A saddle for a cow, hence the meaning of the saying, right? Something useless or ridiculous. Это за это по головке не погладят. They won't stroke you on the head. They won't pet you on the head for that. Right, so here we have по головке, that's the dative, meaning sort of along or upon your little head, головка. They won't pat you on the head for that, meaning they won't like it. Чему быть, того не миновать. A little hard to translate literally. For that which it is to be, it is not to avoid that. Again, it sounds almost ridiculous when you try to translate it literally. Basically, more loosely, that which is to be cannot be avoided, right? There's no avoiding that which is fated to be. Okay, so the grammar there is a little bit tricky, but the dative here is чему, right? Чему, that's the dative of что. And here the construction is быть, right, to be. And then the чему is saying that to which it is to be, or for which it is to be, right? That which is destined to be, we might say in English. Okay, here's a good saying. Ni Bogu sviechka, ni chortu kachurga. Neither a little candle for God, Bogu, that's the dative, nor a fire rake for the devil. Chort is the devil, chortu is the dative. Right, so this means basically neither here nor there, neither good or bad, kind of neither this nor the other. Okay, here's a useful one. Человек человеку волк, right? Man to man, wolf. Okay, no verb there, which often happens in Russian, right? So we could say in English, man is a wolf to man, right? Supplying the linking verb, meaning that human beings can treat each other more savagely than any wild animal would ever do. Okay, любопытный варваре на базаре нос оторвали. This is a good example of something called dative of deprivation that we'll talk more about later, but usually we think of the dative in terms of, indirect objects and giving people presents and doing things for people, right? They tend to be rather positive examples, but an indirect object can be both positively and negatively affected by an action. If it's negatively affected, we can call that the dative of deprivation or the dative of disadvantage. And here, right, curious Barbara is getting her nose ripped off at the fair, meaning, I guess, that she's sticking it where it doesn't belong. And this is sort of like in English, curiosity killed the cat, right? Literally, they tore the nose. Well, na bazare, at the fair, atarvali nos, they tore the nose off. We could say maybe from любопытной Varvarya, right? They tore off her nose. They tore it off from her. She's being disadvantaged. Okay, next type of suffixless verb is, we mentioned already, the /n. Okay, now again, that means that the root of a verb like this is going to consist of some consonant plus an n, right? Just two consonants make up the root of the verb, to which we'll be directly adding our your endings. So if we look over our example one more time, начать, again, note we have the ch, but we don't have the n. We've got to supply that to get our stem, right? Once we do, we get начн, and we add our your endings, and that gives us начну, начнешь, начнет, начнем, начнете, начнут. Now, past tense, this is a bit peculiar. We see that the feminine ending is stressed. That's already slightly irregular and unpredictable. In this case, as sometimes happens, in all the other forms, the stress jumps back onto the prefix. Na is a prefix. So this is a fairly unusual stress pattern here. Начал, начала, начала, начали. Okay, now let's give the full pair for beginning, right? That's a useful verb. And again, we see what we have here is a derived imperfective, right? To go with начать, we need an imperfective. As always, that derived form is an I verb, making it very easy to conjugate. And we see here that if we're deriving an imperfective from a non-syllabic stem, then quite often we'll be inserting an E, sometimes an U, to kind of break up that consonant cluster. So take a moment and note there what's happened. We've added an E in between the ch and the n, and that gives us начинать, right? A new I verb, meaning to be in the process of beginning, right? Imperfective. Again, that's going to be very easy to conjugate. Начинаю, начинаешь, начинает, right? It's just like читать. But again, the perfective, начну, начнешь, начнет, that's a much more complicated verb. Okay, so let's look at a few examples. Kind of like in English, we can begin something, a direct object like work, right? We can begin work. Or in English, we can say we begin to work, right? Of course, we'd often say to begin working, but let's think more in terms of the infinitive, to begin to work. And that'll line up perfectly with the Russian, right? So we can follow this verb to begin in Russian with a direct object in the accusative or with an infinitive. So for example, моя соседка начала работу. She began work, right? Работа here in the accusative. Or with an infinitive, она начала работать. She started to work. She began to work. Infinitive. Она начала писать статью. Okay, she began to write an article. So in this case, the статью, that's the direct object of писать, right, our infinitive. Okay, so let's translate, fill in a few more blanks again, thinking about tense, aspect, and all that stuff. She begins to work every day at 8, or she starts to work every day at 8. Okay, that's present tense, so that's a no-brainer, right? Imperfective. Она начинает работать каждый день в 8. Number 2, my colleague would begin to work at 8. Okay, there's that again. Would do something, past tense. This is describing habit, repetition. So we need past tense imperfective. Мой коллега начинал работать в 8. Now look again at коллега. Look at the мой. That's telling us that this is a male colleague, right? So мой коллега, we're going to need, right, a masculine verb. Мой коллега начинал работать в 8. Number 3, the child will soon begin to talk. Okay, sounds like a one-time, right? It's going to start talking. That's a one-time kind of completed accomplishment of sorts, right? So we need a perfective future tense. Ребенок скоро начнет говорить. Начнет, right? We simply conjugate the perfective verb that gives us our future tense, describing this one-time action. Number 4, our new neighbor began to cook dinner. Okay, again, sounds like we got just a simple past. He started to cook dinner. Наш новый сосед начал. Again, note the stress. That's unpredictable. Начал готовить ужин. Now, by the way, you might contrast that perfective to a sentence like, our new neighbor was beginning to cook dinner. Okay, that would call for an imperfective, right? Он начинал готовить. He was in the process of beginning to cook dinner. As opposed to the perfective, he simply started cooking dinner, right? Он начал готовить ужин. Number 5, the grad student began reading a new book. Аспирантка. Okay, again, simple past. Sounds like she started reading it. It's not that she was in the process of beginning to read it. She simply started to read. Okay, аспирантка, a female grad student, начала читать новую книгу. Number 6, they began to call us every day. Okay, so now this is a little bit tricky maybe. They're now calling us every day, but they started this process only once, right? So even though we do have repetition involved here, the repetition isn't affecting the beginning, right? The beginning here is a one-time action, and then what follows is then the ongoing process of calling us every day. Okay, so you have to watch out which if you have a verb plus an infinitive or multiple verbs, right, we have to think, what is the repetition really, what does it really involve? Okay, so in this case, we need the perfective они начали. Note the stress. Они начали нам звонить каждый день. 7, she began to get used to Russia. Okay, again, she's in the process of getting used to it, but we're focused here on the beginning of that process. That's a one-time action, simple past verb in English. She began to get used to it. Она начала привыкать к России. Okay, now what if we had in English, she was beginning to get used to it? Okay, again, that's describing the process of the beginning. That would be она начинала привыкать к России. Okay, number 8. Okay, I'll begin telling you this story. Okay, sounds like a one-time future tense beginning. Хорошо, я начну рассказывать тебе эту историю. Now, by the way, we did mention earlier that this verb for beginning, as we saw, can be followed by an infinitive, right? Just like in English, to begin to do something. In Russian, that infinitive is always going to be imperfective, right? So why is that? Well, because if we're using an infinitive with starting and also, by the way, stopping, as we'll learn later, the starting or the stopping can be ongoing or repeated or one time or whatever. But the infinitive that follows it, we're always talking about the process, right? I started to cook dinner, right? You started the process of cooking dinner. Or as we'll learn later, you finished the process of cooking dinner, right? So that infinitive is always talking about an extended process. And for that reason, again, any infinitive you use after verbs of beginning or ending is going to be imperfective. Okay, now let's finally look at a few other NSA verbs. Okay, so remember, you might want to circle this verb tag. It's rather confusing. It's rather, again, sort of contrived in a certain sense. So remember, the NS is just standing in for non-syllabic. That N and S is holding the position of any two consonants that form the root of the vowel. And then the infinitive is formed by adding a to it. So NSA, two syllables, non-syllabic root plus a plus the infinitive ending gives us, for example, ждать. Okay, so what's the root and actually the stem of ждать? Simply je, dia, right? Жда, right? So we're going to be adding, remember this is a non-suffixed verb, so we're going to be adding whatever our stem is, we're going to be adding our endings directly to that stem. There's going to be no intervening suffix. Okay, so for ждать, we get жду, ждешь, ждет, ждем, ждете, ждут. Okay, now we have to watch for two variations in NSA verbs. Sometimes, for whatever historical reason, they'll insert a vowel in between those two. We'll write into the middle of the non-syllabic root, right? So for example, звать means to call or name something. And as we already know, actually, we've seen this verb used, although we haven't really been conjugating it yet, right? We insert an o in between the z and the v, right? That gives us zavu, zaviosh, zaviot, zaviom, zaviotie, zavut, right? And there's that form we've used quite a bit already. How do they call you, right? That idiom for being named. Как тебя зовут? Okay, finally, one more example to take in perfective is брать. This is going to insert a mobile yeah, right? Again, to break up that cluster, that br. Again, this isn't really predictable. We just have to learn this as part of the verb. That gives us беру, берешь, берет, берем, берете, берут. Now the final pair here, брать, взять, is probably one of the trickiest pairs in Russian. And you might want to circle it because it's so common, obviously, to take, right? It's an extremely common verb. But it's a tricky pair. Students are always confusing it. You might really want to make a point of learning this. Okay, why is it so tricky? Well, first of all, брать, взять, you can see that we have an instance of suppletion there. The bra looks very different from the, right? I mean, they really look like they don't even belong together in a certain sense. On top of that, the brать, right, is a rather tricky verb type, an NSA verb that we just learned, беру, берешь, and so forth. Now, what about взять? Well, there's no tag on that. So what does that tell us in this textbook? That it's irregular. Okay, so взять is one of, we've mentioned already, the very few Russian verbs that we can call truly irregular. There's no way we can assign them to one of our types. So we're going to have to learn in a moment how to conjugate that. So let's put that aside for the moment and just fill in some blanks here. Let's practice the accusative with some of these verbs. Just these are rather simple examples. Just filling in some phrases here to tell, for example, как зовут X, right? How do they call this person, right? So again, how do they call someone? We need the accusative, right? So, for example, in number one, in English we'd ask, what is your friend's name? In Russian, we're asking, how do they call your friend, right? So your friend is appearing in the accusative as the direct object of calling. Okay, so как зовут? Okay, this is a masculine animate, so it's going to look like a genitive form. Как зовут вашего друга? Okay, what about number two? Here's a feminine, so this is a bit easier, right? А to у, я to you. Как зовут твою сестру? And number three, another masculine animate. How do they call your brother? Как зовут твоего брата? Okay, now next set. Кого ты ждешь? Whom are you awaiting, right? For whom are you waiting? Okay, let's answer the question and say, I am waiting. Жду, right? I am waiting, or I am awaiting X, right? Now we need an accusative, a direct object. I'm waiting for the friend of my brother. Я жду друга моего брата. Right? So again, the only thing we're changing here is drug, that's our new direct object, but the of my brother part, that genitive isn't going to change, right? Number 5, I'm waiting for my female friend, or our female friend. Жду нашу подругу. Number 6, I'm waiting for the professor, or we might assume my professor, or our professor. Жду профессора. Я жду профессора. Number 7, what are you taking with yourself, literally? So this saboi literally means with oneself. We'll learn more about that later. Here we're just kind of throwing it in as an example. Of course, the important part here is what are you taking? Что ты берешь? Okay, so we're taking something. We need to fill these in the accusative. Let's say I'm taking an umbrella. Я беру зонт. Or я беру с собой зонт. I'm taking an umbrella with myself. I'm taking along an umbrella. Number 8, I'm taking a book. Я беру книгу. Я беру с собой книгу. Accusative. Okay, I'm taking along a jacket, a coat. Я беру с собой пальто. Okay, that's a neuter, so no change there. Okay, a quick poster. This is a very famous one. А ну-ка взяли. Right? This nuka is kind of a funny phrase. It's often used kind of with children, like come on, you can do it, you got it. Nuka. It's kind of an exhortative little phrase there. Взяли means something like it's a past tense form used as an urgent command. This is a rather funny little idiom that we won't really study systematically, but we will revisit this later when we get to verbs of motion. Right? Взяли, the idea is something like, well, literally, we've taken it, perfective. We've grabbed it, we've taken it, right? We're underway. Right, so here this is used as kind of again, we're urging this person, come on, you got it. Or literally, you took it, right? You've already done it. It's as if it's already been done. Okay, ну-ка взяли. Okay, so here is a table of 4 aspectual pairs. And if we look them over, we see most of these forms are completely irregular. Right? That is, they're not tagged by type. Now, remember that just because obviously two verbs form a pair, it doesn't mean they're conjugating in the same way. Now let's look these over from that point of view. To want is хотеть, захотеть. Okay, both of those are irregular. And look what's happened. To get the perfective, as we know, we often simply add a prefix, za. Okay, adding the prefix is not going to change the underlying vowel. So хотеть is a crazy irregular vowel, but changing the za isn't going to make it any more odd than it already is, right? It's just za plus хотеть. Okay, so let's look over the pairs here and we'll see how crazy these are. Хочу, хочешь, хочет, хотим, хотите, хотят. Okay, we're mixing e and yo endings. The stress pattern is totally bizarre, right? This is a completely irregular verb. We just have to memorize it and not really worry too much about why is it like this, right? It's just a weird verb. Okay, but now compare those forms to the perfective, right? We're simply adding za, but everything else is the same. Захочу, захочешь, захочет, захотим, захотите, захотят. Okay, and that means perfective, something like not an ongoing urge to do something, but a sudden getting of an urge, right? Think about wanting something in sort of a perfective sense. Well, this happens to be another one of those verbs that we could think of as being inceptive in the perfective, meaning you start to feel an urge. You suddenly begin to want something, right? So again, захотеть, a good English translation for that is to get the urge to do something. Okay, look at the pair for giving. Давать, дать. Okay, давать is an avai verb. rather crazy form. Now we're going to learn more about that tomorrow, right? So it's hard to kind of lay all of this stuff out. There's a lot to unpack all at once. But so we'll talk more about this pattern tomorrow. But let's take a first look at it here. Avai verbs are sort of like ova verbs in the sense that that suffix avai collapses. In this case, it sort of just completely vanishes in the conjugated forms, right? So we get not davayu, davayish, or anything like that, but rather dayu, dayosh, dayot, dayom, dayotie, dayut. Okay, so that's somewhat odd, I suppose, but it's a regular type. We're going to see other verbs that fall into this pattern. And this is another one of these verbs that I would really urge you to try to just make a point of memorizing. As you can imagine, the verb giving is extremely common. Anyway, so more on that tomorrow. Let's look at the perfective dat. Well, there's no verb tag. This is totally irregular. And if we take a look at the forms, we can see why, right? Dam, dash, dast, dadim, daditye, dadut. Now look at the past tense, dal, dala, dalo, dal, dala, dala, dali. Okay, again, there's that stressing of the ending only, the feminine ending only in the past tense. Otherwise, it's regular in the past tense. By the way, just like the first three forms we saw, chatiet, look at it in the past tense, chatiel, chatiela, right? It's totally regular, right? In the sense that we got those past tense forms straight from the infinitive. Same thing with davat, right? That's a weird verb in the conjugated forms, but in the past tense, it's regular. And again, that's how we expect the vast majority of Russian verbs to work. We're going straight from the infinitive in the past tense, no matter how weird the conjugated forms may look. Okay, let's for eating. Again, this is a totally irregular verb. Есть. By the way, it looks just like it is, right? So we just happen to have this coinciding, right? This kind of coincidence that this word есть could mean is or to eat. Right, then the prefix, the perfective to eat is съесть, right? Now what's happened here, we've added a prefix sa, simply what looks like a C, right? The Russian S. That's a prefix. We'll learn more about it in book 3. But it is hard, right? It's just simply a hard sa or S, right? Okay, now we're writing the hard sign. Note that that's a hard sign, not a sa sign. And we're writing that here to show that this is a hard S, despite the fact that we happen to be adding it in front of a soft vowel, yeah. Right, remember, because of the Russian spelling rules, if it weren't for that hard sign, we would assume that S is now to be pronounced as a soft S. But that's not true here, right? Because we're adding hard S to a soft vowel, yeah. Okay, so that's a little bit tricky. We're going to talk more about that again later when we start talking about prefixes in detail. But we might note now that this is the only use that the hard sign has in modern Russian. Ever since the Bolshevik spelling reforms, this is the only role that the hard sign plays, right? Again, namely to show that a consonant is indeed hard despite the fact that it happens to be followed by a soft vowel. That's the only thing a hard sign does anymore in Russian. And that explains why it's somewhat unusual. Really, actually quite unusual. Okay, so let's look at the pairs. To eat, imperfective. Yem, yesh, jest. Note the hard T there. Yedim, yedite, yedyat. The imperative is also irregular, by the way. Yesh. In past tense, actually, the infinitive is a bit weird. It ends in a stya, right, instead of simply a soft T. But anyway, we keep the yeah and we get yell, yella, yella, yeli. Okay, so the past tense may be a little bit odd, but that's really because of the fact that we just simply have a rather weird infinitive. Okay, anyway, the perfective, right, to eat up completely, again, same pattern, we're just adding a hard S in front of it. Съем, съешь, съест, съедим, съедите, съедят. Okay, you may have heard me trying to pronounce that very clearly. To say first a hard S, then follow that with a soft vowel. It's good to pause a little bit when you're practicing this, right? So first say s, just a regular hard S, yam, yam, right? So if you pause a bit, that gives you the chance to pronounce right hard, then followed distinctly by soft without blurring the two together. Now remember, if you blur the two, kind of blend them together, then inevitably you're going to end up softening the S. Okay, so practice just pausing ever so slightly, and then as you continue practicing, try to make the pause as brief as you possibly can. That distinction can be hard to notice when Russians are speaking at a normal pace, but it can be heard in any event once your ear has been trained to hear it. Okay, finally, we learned brать already. Беру, берешь, берет. That's an NSA verb, so it's actually regular, even though it is a bit difficult. But взять, the perfective, is completely irregular. Возьму, возьмешь, возьмет, возьмем, возьмете, возьмут. Okay, now again, we see that we could think of that really as a kind of non-suffixed verb in the sense that we have this bizarre stem that we can't get from the infinitive. We need to simply memorize that, возьм, right, and then add the yol endings directly to that. But in any case, we can't classify this verb according to type. It's just doing its own irregular thing here. Now, look at the past tense. It's actually really quite predictable. Only thing is that the is stressed. That feminine ending is stressed. Взял, взяла, взяла, взяли. Okay, let's fill in a few blanks. Again, same old thing. Watch tense, watch aspect. She took the backpack. Okay, sounds like a one-time action, past tense. Она взяла рюкзак. Она взяла рюкзак. Note the stress. Number 2, I'll take the umbrella. Okay, sounds like, again, a one-time action, but now it is future tense. So we'll say, я возьму зонт. I'll take it. We always take the umbrella. Okay, that's present tense. We also have repetition, of course. Мы всегда берем зонт. Imperfective. Number 4, they eat so much. Okay, present tense. Again, also repetition, habit, clearly imperfective. Они едят так много. Они так много едят. Они едят так много. They eat so much. Number 5, they ate all the caviar. Okay, sounds like a completed past tense. Therefore, perfective action. We're going to use a form of съесть. Они съели всю икру. They ate up all the caviar. Number 6, I don't eat meat. Okay, that's present tense. It's your ongoing behavior, clearly imperfective. Я не ем мясо. I don't eat meat. Number 7, they gave me a pen. Okay, sounds like a one-time completed action, perfective, past tense. Они дали мне ручку. They gave to me pen. Okay, number 8, we'll give you food. Okay, sounds like, as best we can tell, a one-time event. Let's assume that at least and say, мы дадим тебе еду. Мы дадим тебе еду. Okay, right, that's perfective. That's a one-time future action. Now here, there's no context, so we could assume maybe that this is going to be an ongoing thing. Well, how would we express that in Russian? We need a imperfective future tense. Мы будем давать тебе еду. That sounds like it's going to be a repeated, ongoing action, right? We will give you food habitually, repeatedly, and so forth. And that's actually what we have in number 9. I jumped the gun a bit there. We'll always give you food. Right, let's go ahead and throw in a всегда to make it perfectly clear. This is going to be a repeated action. That would call for imperfective future tense. Мы всегда будем давать тебе еду. Right, будем давать. Number 10, I want to speak Russian. Okay, I want, present tense, obviously imperfective. Я хочу говорить по-русски. Я хочу говорить. I want to speak. By the way, we didn't mention that just like in English, again, we can follow the verb to want in Russian with an infinitive. Again, it looks very much like the English construction. I want to speak. Я хочу говорить. Number 11, we want to relax. Мы, present tense, imperfective, мы хотим отдохнуть. And number 12, they want to eat. Они хотят есть. Есть. Sorry, I didn't make that a soft T. Они хотят есть. Okay, here are a few final questions to think about. Ты уже начал видеть сны по-русски? Have you already begun to see dreams in Russian? It's a good question, right? If you start dreaming in the language you're studying, it means you're making some kind of progress. Now, if we were asking a female interlocutor this question, we'd say, ты уже начала видеть сны по-русски? Number two, ты хочешь жить в России? Do you want to live in Russia? А что ты там будешь есть? What will you eat there? Hopefully a lot of caviar. Number three, что ты берешь с собой каждый день? What do you take with yourself, literally, what do you take with yourself every day? Okay, so you would use the verb я беру and then give a few accusatives, right? A few direct objects. What do you take along every day? Number four, ты ешь мясо или нет? Do you eat meat or not? Okay, I guess the answer to that would be да, я ем мясо, or нет, я не ем. I don't eat meat. Я не ем мясо. Okay, now some follow-up questions. А рыбу? Well, what about fish? Do you eat fish? Now note the fish is still in the accusative because we've got this understood verb, right? We're talking about what you eat. А икру? What about caviar, right? Follow-up questions. You eat caviar? Okay, that does it for today. The lesson was a bit dry, right? It's always like that when we're introducing new verb types. And you might keep in mind that, of course, these types we've seen, it's not like we're getting a long list of examples for each type. That's because, at least for now, we won't be seeing tons and tons of each particular type of non-suffix verb, right? They're certainly not as common as I verbs or ova verbs or e verbs, right? All those major types that we looked at last chapter. So, for example, va verbs like žít, we're not going to be seeing tons of va verbs. If I were to guess, I'd say in books 1 and 2, we might be lucky to see 5 of them. I think not even that many. I can think of 2 right off the top of my head, right? So these types are relatively rare, but I think it's useful to remember that non-suffix verbs as a class, right, consisting of several sort of subtypes, are generally quite common, right? If you look at the verb chart in the back of the book, right, where we list all the types, you can see the whole bottom half of the list consists of non-suffixed verbs, right? And as we've seen today, they're all essentially doing the same thing. They all take yule endings, and they all, again, well, not all, but the vast majority of them are missing something from the infinitive that we have to know in order to conjugate them. And so the tags we're giving them, the verb type tags we're giving them, are helping us supply that missing bit of information that we need to create our verb stem. And then remember, once we get the stem, for example, živ, then it's very easy. We're simply adding the yule endings. And we've also seen today that no matter how oddly a verb type may behave in the conjugated forms, in the past tense, usually they're very predictable. We just have to watch out for the stressed I ending, which sometimes happens, and then somewhat even less often, stress jumping back onto a prefix. Okay, so we've seen several verb types now. Hopefully you're getting more comfortable with juggling tense and aspect, and also using conjugating some of these major verb types. So try to drill the ones we just learned today. We're going to learn a few more, or at least one more type tomorrow, and also talk about verbs that take indirect objects, of course, in the dative case in Russian. Okay, until then, до свидания, товарищи.